And then after the presentation, we will share the PowerPoint notes with you, and we will also share the recording with you. Yeah, so I'll be recording it. And then as per usual, if any of you have questions that you would like to ask me, then the best way to do that in order for me to answer the questions towards the end of the presentation is through the chat box. So just pop your question in the chat box, and there's no real time limitation on us today, so I'll try and get to the questions towards the end of the presentation. And as Michelle said, please, once I start the presentation, if you can just mute yourselves, because as you know, from all the hundreds and thousands of Zoom training sessions you've attended, it is quite disruptive for all the attendees if you haven't muted yourself. And then I'll give you a bit of a rundown as well with regards to what we are intending with the 6-month program. You know, I am also doing 90-minute once-off training sessions individually and separately, which is more of a condensed version of the 6 sessions or the 6-month program. So you're more than welcome to attend as many of these sessions that you want. I mean, the more, I suppose, one learns about POPI, the better, or you know, best for all of you, because as you will see from today's presentation, there might be quite a lot of little practical changes that need to take place in your standard documentation. Okay, we're now at 68 participants. I think I'll start, and then as people log in, they can just start following. So welcome everybody to a follow-up session to our session last week, Wednesday, which was the first of 6 sessions that we intend doing for the market. If you haven't registered for the remaining 5 sessions, please let us know, and we will ensure that you get registered and that you get the logon details. And if you miss any of the future sessions, then you're more than welcome to let us know, and we can send you the recording. But hopefully after the 6 sessions, you would be in a position to fully understand what POPI and our information regulator will require of you in the real estate industry. I think generally the attendees are all involved in real estate activities, even though our intention is also to assist general business out there with the upgearing of the information policies and their privacy policies. So if any of you have contact with other businesses outside of the real estate industry and in discussion or conversation, it comes up or comes out that that particular business also needs assistance with gearing up on their privacy information policy or internal policies, then you are more than welcome to refer them to both Marina and myself. Marina is also at STBB, and we're more than happy to assist any businesses, because all businesses are affected by this, in gearing up for the deadlines, which is next year, as you will see. So yes, please feel free to attend any of the other shorter sessions or any of the other 5 remaining sessions in the Gearing Up program. So in as far as POPI is concerned, I think it's important for everybody to understand what POPI stands for. It's an acronym for the Protection of Personal Information Act 4 of 2013. It's interesting that POPI has been around in draft format since 2013, and it has taken the information regulator 7 years in which oh, sorry, can everybody just mute themselves?
WhatsApp. And I just put the meeting ID and the...
Okay, I've muted everybody. So it's taken the information regulator 7 years in which to fully develop, in its own opinion, the rules applicable to South African businesses in the business's quest as part of its service delivery to collect the information from their clients, how information is collected, how that information is processed, when you need clients' consent, what the consent needs to look like, and in particular, using the client's information for purposes of future marketing. So it's taken 7 years for POPI to be refined, and the regulations were published in March this year for public participation or public comment, and unexpectedly, the Act was signed into law on the 22nd of June this year by our president. In terms of it having been enacted so quickly after the regulations were published, and unexpectedly during COVID, I don't think anyone expected POPI to be enacted. It's possibly a piece of legislation which was the last thing on everybody's mind. We think the reason why POPI eventually was enacted is because South Africa's privacy laws and information privacy laws are relatively lacking, or were relatively lacking, in as far as our interaction or compliance with international information and privacy laws are concerned. There are international standards to which South Africa has subscribed, called the GDPR, in terms of which POPI has been drafted. And South Africa signed up with the GDPR, which is the international standards of processing information and dealing with clients' information, a number of years ago. So it was absolutely necessary for our government to push through our POPI and regulations in order for us to be able, and our companies who export and companies which import into South Africa for international trade especially, that POPI was enacted. Luckily for all of us, as service suppliers or businesses that are being affected by POPI and the regulations, despite the fact that it was promulgated so unexpectedly, we have 12 months from the 1st of July 2020 in which to gear up our businesses in order for our businesses to comply with our obligations in terms of this. So I suppose we now have 11 months left in order to relook everything that to do with our clients' information, reasons we obtain the information, how we obtain the information, where we store it, when we delete it, and all those elements which affect our businesses. We have 11 months left in order to get our systems in place, in order for our businesses to draft a policy, to do the analysis of the way we're dealing with information at the moment, and then eventually change the way in which we deal with the information timeously before July 2021, which is when our businesses must have complied with all the POPI provisions. So we do have enough time, which is why we thought a 6-month program might be a good idea to break down the different elements in a bit more detail than just doing a once-off session or 2 sessions. And after 2 sessions, you're still confused as to what needs to be done. We hope that the 6 months process or program will assist you a lot more in preparing your businesses. I think before I start with the detail, it is quite important to not panic. We don't need to panic. We need to take a deep breath because there is 11 months left in order for us to gear our businesses up. So you don't need to change the way in which you use your current database for direct marketing or canvassing, by way of example, tomorrow or next week. You don't need to do the opt-out and opt-in consents on hyperlinks to your emails or to any form of communication with your client quite yet. You just need to start processing your current information, considering certain things, and you need to just open your mind up to what will be expected and how you think you could and would have to change the way your business operates. So a lot of people obviously, get frustrated with things like POPI, which in addition to all the other requirements, obviously affects you again. Standard documentation will have to be reviewed again. It was reviewed not long ago with FICA, Now, there's always just something else, something new. But if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. So if you have that in mind, and you understand that you've got enough time to get your business and your operation and the documentation, everything else compliant, it isn't that expensive if you start now. The POPI Act also mentions the words reasonable and reasonably many, many times over. So as long as your changes to your information policy or privacy policy, client information privacy policy, obliges internal and external changes which are reasonable or which could reasonably be expected, you will be absolutely fine when July 2021 comes around. In fact, I always think about myself as a consumer when I look at changing rules or implementing policies for my own organization as a supplier. I think all of us would agree that when we wear our consumer hat, our own hats as consumers, we don't have anywhere to turn when we receive unsolicited marketing calls from the insurance business, from the credit, the lending business. We often get phone calls where we are very unsure as to where our telephone numbers came from. How did Sanlam get my contact particulars? And if I ask Sanlam to remove my telephone number or I block them on my Truecaller, why do they continue to contact me, to cold call or canvas? And if one bears in mind what it is that we as consumers expect in as far as our own personal information is concerned, and how we would like our selection of whether we want future marketing, to receive future marketing or not, if we just apply those rules of what it is we reasonably expect to our own business policies, it makes a lot of sense that at all times you need to explain to your client why information is collected, what you do with it, where you keep it, and eventually what you do with it going forward. Compliance in terms of something like POPI, which is a client information privacy, is a team sport. So you need to, right at the beginning, you need to decide who will be doing this in your organization. Obviously, with the bigger brands, you'll have a head office that will probably be doing, a national POPI review. And then from your head office perspective, you might have branch offices, which will be directly regulated from the head office, but you also might have your licensed offices, which run independently, but by only using the brand and the branded documents. So you need to decide who within your organization will be responsible for the review of the company and or the office's client information policies. And then once you've made that decision, then obviously you need to make those people responsible for a review. Within STBB, it might be worth mentioning, we've got a small committee, which are a few individuals who will be responsible not only for reviewing STBB as an organization's internal and external information policies, but that committee will also be the committee that will assist our clients with setting up their information policies. So it is important that you identify who in your office will be involved and responsible, and or your brand and or your organization. So if you're at a branch office and you're an agent in a branch office dialing in today, then you might want to find out from your head office perspective who will be dealing with it. And then, of course, it is important to, once you've made the identifications and the areas and the departments and the people and the types of clients where you might need to adjust the way in which you deal with that information as opposed to what you do now, the policy itself and the processes which will be expected to be followed post-July 2021 is, again, like with FICA, a risk-based approach. So you do need to ask questions as you start doing the identification within your current organization. You know, what type of risk is involved in collection of these clients' data? What type of risk is involved in the processing of that client's data? What type of risk is involved in storing the data? And then lastly, just do away with the idea that POPI compliance is an IT project. IT and your IT compliance and security, in other words, where you're storing and how you password protect and you've got access, which will be an element in the review of your current situation, it's only an element. There are lots of other elements to your organization's POPI policy or client information privacy policy. It's not just IT or the IT system which is affected. It's only one of the elements. So just so that you have an idea of what to expect throughout the 6 sessions, and I have a suspicion that when you look at the summary here, that session 2 might be one of the more important sessions for you as a real estate operator, because in session 2, I will be sharing the practical clauses which we think could be used to amend or update your mandates, notices, contracts, your information sheets, you know, what it is that you could be building into your standard documentation. So, so do sign up for session 2, because that is where I will be dealing with the type of consent that you will need if you utilize clients' information, either by having bought the client's information from Lightstone or CMA for canvassing purposes, what the standard documentation will be that you will need, or the standard consent that you will need, what your email embedded opt-in, opt-out will look like, what the consent will look like that we suggest will be built into the mandate for processing your seller's information, the consents that you will require to be able to share the information. So the practical documentation changes will be discussed in detail throughout session 2. So I think it might be quite an important session for you to attend. If you would like to see more of the practicalities before session 2, then as I said before, I do a condensed 90-minute session, which is quite condensed from beginning to end, where I deal with those practical suggestions in a summary format. So if you want to attend a 90-minute session, if you do get an invitation separately to the 6-month program, feel free to attend the 90-minute session and session 2 in the 6-month program. So I think everybody should understand what the definition of personal information entails in terms of the POPI Act. It is defined, and this definition has now been enacted. So when we talk about clients' personal information and the privacy of that information and the processing of that information, this is really what is meant with personal information. It means information relating to an identifiable living natural person and an identifiable existing juristic person, but not limited to. Subsection A deals with special personal information relating to the person's race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, nationality, ethnicity, social origin, color, sexual orientation, age, etc., etc. All the intimate information that for some reason might be collected by a specific business. When we refer to real estate, if we look at subsection A, when we deal with personal information or special personal information that you and I collect, process, store, and then have to delete or use for future purposes, I think marital status we request in every single document because it is a requirement in law. We might ask for nationality. We ask for age. And I think in terms of our COVID questionnaires, we do ask a bit about medical, the mental health well-being of a client. So pretty much every single document that clients complete, or prospective clients for that matter, has a degree of special personal information that they submit. And in order to deal with special personal information, there are special rules, which I'll cover with you just now. Personal information also includes details about education, which we ask for in our real estate documentation. Now we ask for medical, we definitely ask for financial information. We might even ask sometimes for criminal information, but it's not standard. And we definitely ask for employment history of the person. We ask our clients for identifying numbers. We ask them for physical addresses, telephone numbers. At present, we don't really deal with biometric information, but as we go forward in the electronic, the development of the electronic era and electronic world, and identification by electronic means, biometric information might become prevalent, etc. So I wanted to show you that pretty much all information which you gather from your client, collect from your client, get your client to complete, then take that information and process it. You upload it onto a system. You keep that information during the course of that transaction. You share that information, and then you use it possibly for future purposes. All of that is covered in terms of your obligation in the POPI Act. So there isn't really much of the information you collect which you can separate from POPI and the requirements. So each of your businesses or organizations will have to sit down and really discuss and identify the means in which your client's information is collected. And clients for purposes of POPI includes pretty much anybody from whom you get information about themselves, about their finances, about their properties. You get your prospective purchasers to complete viewing registers. You get your sellers to complete the information sheet attached to mandates. You get your purchasers to complete the information sheet. You have access to deeds office databases. Now you get information from there as well. You would have access to council databases. You collect information from your property databases, whether they're internal, if you work for a group like, for instance, Pam Golding or Jarvis or Rawson's, Leapfrog, whoever it is, there are some internal shared databases that from where you get some information in order to draw stats or lists or area lists, pricing lists. And then we know about CMA, we know about Lightstone. So you do need to realize that your property databases, internal and external, is also a source of information that you are collecting from clients. Or you may also phone your attorney for details, and you may get details from social media. It's just a short summary of where I could identify information is collected in real estate activities. So within your own office or your organization, depending on the structure that you've decided needs to be reviewed. If it's a big brand, it will be from head office and it will filter through to the branches. Head office will give guidance to the licensed franchises. This is what needs to happen. Step one, you must look at the ways in which information is collected. And if you go and analyze the information which is being collected with and through the means I've just summarized, you will see that pretty much all the information that you get, name and surname, ID number, telephone number, email address, property description, marital status, right down to the bond over the property, amount of bond, all of the information falls within the definition of personal information in terms of POPI. So which means once you've identified all the sources that you get information from, the next step obviously will be, as I said, for session 2's benefit, is to see what the changes are that you need to make to the documentation and the avenues, how you deal with the sources from which your information is obtained. There are obviously different reasons why you need to collect information and different pieces of information from clients. You and I are both aware of our massive FICA or Financial Intelligence Center obligation as an accountable institution. Estate agents or agencies and conveyancing attorneys are the first two main accountable institutions that the Financial Intelligence Center obliges in terms of identifying clients and verifying the client's identity as well as the money in the transaction. So if you if you start your analysis and you have a look at your, say for instance, your buyers register, where you get buyers to complete information for listing, so that you have the buyer's details in order to keep in touch with them regarding a specific listing. You just need to go and look at the buyer's register and ask yourself the question, why are you obtaining information from the prospective buyer? Is it in terms of law, so like FICA or for SARS or deed registry purposes, or is it just for your own information? So that's how you will need to go and analyze the different reasons why you are collecting information in the different ways. And then, of course, different bits of information is obtained in different documents. So once you've had a look at what information you're collecting, from who, and why you're collecting that information, then you've got to go and do an analysis within your organization of what it is that you do with that information. So at the moment, in real estate or in real estate offices, we have now identified that the information is used for the following purposes mostly. Firstly, what you do with the seller's information sheet that you got completed with the signature of your mandate, you take that information sheet back to your office and it normally gets uploaded onto your internal database. You also upload that information onto your external databases like CMA. The reason for that is that you have contracted with CMA, and in return for you uploading your client's details onto CMA, CMA then allows you to also draw statistics from them. So you've got to go and look what it is that you do with the client's information. You obviously keep physical copies of the information and the information sheets, IDs and utilities on a physical or in a physical file. You share the information sheets, IDs and utilities with your conveyancers. You send and share copies of all the client's information and the sheets on which they completed the information to the mortgage originators or banks. And you've never really considered the fact that the telephone numbers and email addresses, and possibly inside the emails, where clients have emailed you a PDF copy of his or her ID book, you therefore also keep copies on your devices. And the device is an independent device to your brand's internal database. So once you've identified what it is that you're doing with the information that you are collecting and why you're collecting the information, then we move on to the following. And these are very, very important questions that you have got to be able to answer as an office, as an organization, as a service supplier in terms of POPI post-July 2021. In performing our duties and during the course of collecting information, do we ask our clients permission to collect their data? Do we actually ask them to consent to us collecting personal information from them? I assume that no one really is asking permission. We just assume that the client has given their permission. By virtue of the client completing that questionnaire, we think that the client has given us the consent to collect the data. Have we asked our clients permission to input the data into our system? No. None of us really ask them whether it's all right for us to take the information sheet back to our offices and ask our administrative support staff to upload and type their personal information into our internal database. We don't ask them their permission. In fact, again, I think we assume that they've agreed to it because it's just assumed that they know we will be putting it into our software. Do we ask the client's permission to search their details at the deeds office, council, or property database like CMA? No. Again, I think us in the real estate industry, we just assume that our clients have agreed to it. Do we ask clients specific permission to share their information with conveyancers and the MOs? Again, I don't think so. So I'm just asking these questions of you because if you're not able to answer this affirmatively, then these are the changes that will need to be made. We need to then start asking our clients permission. Do we ask our clients permission to share their information with the property databases? This in particular is very important because this alludes to the information data that's available for future marketing, which I know that some of you get from CMA and Lightstone. If you want to canvas a specific area, where do you find the telephone numbers? There's no yellow pages any longer. So normally, I know that the real estate market uses external databases and that you pay a specific fee in order to obtain lists and lists of names and telephone numbers. So in order for that database to build itself up to a point where it has a proper database, someone has to input that information. And it usually is the real estate industry, estate agents that will type the information into CMA. So if you can't really answer those first 5 questions affirmatively, then I'm quite sure the second half of the questions that you've got to ask yourself in the analysis of what you're doing now, as opposed to what you will need to do, will also be not answered affirmatively. So in the same breath, do we ask permission? Do we ask the consent? Do we actually explain to our clients why we are collecting their data? So not only names and ID numbers, but do we actually tell them that in terms of FICA, we are obliged to get their ID number and a copy of their ID? I don't think so, because I don't see a reference to the FICA obligations in any of your or my questionnaires or information sheets. So do we explain to our clients why we are putting the information into our own systems? No, we don't. We've got to. Do we explain to them why we are looking up their details on the Deeds Office Council? Do we explain to them why we are sharing the information with the conveyancers? No. Do we explain to them that we will be sharing the information with the property databases and why? No. So in your analysis, once you've now had a look at all the sources where you and your organization get information from for the various reasons, you've got to actually write that down. And then you start looking at your standard documentation and the way in which you explain to clients why you're getting certain details and then get their permission to do those things with the information. It then becomes a lot easier to understand what the changes will entail. So, short of showing you those practical examples of what we think should go into all those standard documentation of yours, mandates, information sheets, buyers registers, listings with Property 24 and private property, how you have to deal with your internal databases, whether you can use information to directly market or canvas. We are not going to go through that today. We're only going through that in the second session, but I just want you to open your mind to the answers that you will have for the questions I've posed in this slide. And when you've answered no to most of these questions, when we get to session 2, hopefully you would already have done a bit of an analysis of your own documents, of your own consents that you get. How would you and will you explain to clients why we are collecting things and stay on the program? After session 2, you might still not be in a position to draft your own policy. But by session 2, hopefully you guys would have identified the individuals who will be involved in the development of the internal policy and who will then be proactive in identifying the type of information, how it's collected, what is done with it within your organization. You'll also have to look at your rental book, at your rental department. You'll have to look at emails. You'll have to look at devices. The program is actually extensive if you start looking at all of that. And then we talk about doing a gap analysis. Gap analysis is exactly what it says, where you actually have a look at what you have now in as far as your information policies are concerned. So what are you doing about your client's information now? How do you collect it? Where do you store it? Do you get consent? Do you actually explain to them why you're getting information from them? And where we want to be. So what do we need to do to close the gap of what we're doing now and where we need to be in July 2021? So these are just a few steps that we will be taking in the next 6 months. The first step is for you and your organization to identify the current state of information processing and collection. So someone will need to start writing that process out or drawing an organogram. You know, you have information that for a property listing, you collect from the seller, and you collect it in the form of an information sheet. And that information sheet actually gets put into a folder. That information sheet, also the information therein is uploaded onto a system. That is then uploaded onto the groups database, and that is uploaded onto the CMA database. So that is your current state of information processing and collection. Then you also need to identify which departments will be affected. So it's pretty much all your departments. It will be your rental department. It will be the department in the rental department that deals with tenants. It will be landlords. It will be maybe management companies. So you've got to identify the different departments which are affected. And then you need to identify where you want the departments to be by July 2021. So you've got to then look carefully to decide which documentation will need to be addressed, where you'll have to have hyperlinks on emails, where there's an opt-in and opt-out. Do you need more than one consent, or is one consent sufficient to get info, process info, store info, and then delete the info later? So it's just a process of identification in the beginning. And then obviously you need to identify the gaps in the various departments, from the collection of info to the processing to the storing, and especially future use of the information. Devise the improvements in each of the departments. In other words, look specifically what people have to say on the phone, what they need to do with their cell phones, what they need to do with information stored, how they email information, who they share it with in the different departments. And then lastly, if there's a cost, you need to consider the costs and obviously put a timeline to all the changes that need to be implemented. So your homework between today's session and session 2 is to actually type out or write out a gap analysis between what you're doing now, and that's the biggest portion of your gap analysis. And then you won't know exactly yet where you want to be in the future, but this should give you a good indication of what we need from you, what your clients will expect from you by July 2021. Full explanation of all the steps surrounding clients' information and getting their consent to deal with the information in all the ways that we are. And that's that in as far as what the information is, how you get it in the real estate industry, what you do with it. And then in session 2, we are going to show you all the different types of consents that we think will need to be inputted, will need to be pre-printed, and also the way in which we think that you guys will need to explain to your client base, sellers and buyers, why you're getting certain pieces of information, what are you going to do with it, how are you going to keep it private, where you're going to store it. So that will be dealt with in session 2. So now I'm going to allow for an opportunity to ask some questions. Emery has asked a question about property management to cross over into biometric info. Yes, so if your organization, there is a degree of biometrics involved. And biometrics is an interesting way of identification. That is where you have fingerprint analysis and sometimes even retina analysis. For access, for instance, access to certain areas, you use your fingerprint instead of a code. So that is also going to have to, if your organization deals with some form of biometrics, that is also a bit of, or part of your information analysis. So, you know, how you store the information, the fingerprint analysis. You know, do you need to explain to your client why you're doing it that way if you're a property management company? So biometrics will become more and more prevalent and relevant as we go forward. And it might be worth our while in developing our client information privacy policies, to think to the future, and also have a section regarding biometrics. I'll give you guys a good example of this. So just from STBB's perspective, because of all the issues that law firms have in the interception of emails, no matter how secure our emails are, and we have the strongest firewall possibly that money can afford, STBB has. Despite all of that, the way in which I communicate with my clients, short of a phone call, which is impossible for every single bit of information that I share or collect, the only other way that we ask clients for things, banking details, proof of payment, is on email. And what we've identified is that clients' emails are unsecured. So when we send an email from our secured STBB emails and we send it to a client's Gmail account, emails are intercepted before they reach our client at Gmail. And it's very difficult for us to identify when we are dealing with a fraudster as opposed to the client. Even if we make a phone call, it could be the fraudster that poses as a client. So what we developed, and we are launching this very shortly, it's just the way in which our firm has decided to deal with sensitive and intimate client information, which is really everything that we collect, especially banking details and proof of payments. We have a virtual vault that houses an e-vault for every client. So every time we are instructed with a conveyancing transaction, we create a virtual e-vault for the seller and a virtual e-vault for the buyer. And what we will be doing when we launch the new version of e-vault, we will be communicating with the client via our app instead of on email. We will send them our banking details to the client's vault via our app. And when the client then sends proof of payment, we will ask them to upload it via the app, and it is integrated with our system. It's protected in as far as it cannot be intercepted. So we will be starting our own STBB move to future way of dealing with information and collecting information which are not being password protected. IDs are available for fraudsters to clone. Bank details we ask for every seller and buyer to deliver. It's just not secure enough. For that reason, we are going to start communicating with our sellers and our buyers through an app platform that cannot be intercepted. And so we feel that that is at least the first step in STBB ensuring the privacy of communicating with clients when we send bank details and they send proof of payment, that we do that via our e-vault or the client's e-vault. And that has cost our organization a lot of money, but we need to move in towards the future because emails are not secure. And the longer we as organizations take to think of new ways in order to communicate with all our sellers and our buyers and our landlords and our tenants, attorneys and real estate partners in a way different to email, which is just not safe enough. You know, the fraudsters are going to be successful in interception. And there's a lot of money that has been lost in this way. And it's no one's fault. It's just that emails are not the best way to collect information sheets, to collect bank account, proof of bank details, proof of payment. It's just not the safest way of doing that. So we suggest that all our real estate partners download our app. And if you have a matter with STBB, when our new eVault update launches, then communications will be via the app. It's not going to be on email as much. And hopefully eventually we'll completely move away from emailing, you know, bank details on an app, on an email. We're going to do it only through the app so that it is a lot more secure. So, you know, we've had to think of ways in which we could improve the safety and the security of all this intimate and personal information that we're collecting and that we're storing. You know, these fraudsters have access and they hold companies to ransom. And we've really got to try and stop emailing PDF attachments and get into the habit of doing that. So that really is how STBB is trying to get more compliant with our own POPI requirements as an organization going forward. Okay, another question. Sean is asking, if it is publicly held information that anyone can access, does the way we treat that info change? Yes, but you have to explain to the client somewhere in your documentation that you will be accessing information, say from the deeds office, which is a public organization and the information is public, and why you will be accessing it. So you can't just access the information at the deeds office and then load that information onto your system to use that information for future canvassing. You've got to tell that client at some point in time, when you engage with them then in future, that you've accessed this information from the deeds office or from CMA. We'll deal with a lot more on the detail and also how you guys deal with CMA, service level agreements, and how we suggest, you know, the opt-out works with direct marketing. I mean, the way the regulations are currently drafted, it says, just so that you know, in preparation for next time, in section 66 of POPI, it says, with regards to direct marketing, it says, you're not allowed to canvass, in other words, contact someone for marketing directly, if you haven't obtained that person's consent. So in my mind, and I'm sure in your mind, that's a very confusing thing, because you can't get someone's consent in order to contact them unless you contact them. So it's a sort of a catch-22. So in the next session, I'm going to give you answers and solutions to that. How do you ensure that when you cold call someone that you have never previously spoken to, in a way that complies with POPI, with the section 66 provisions regarding direct marketing? And then we're also going to show you how you deal with your existing database of clients' information that you've collected over the years. Then we're going to deal with opting out when clients ask you to please remove their details from your system. Whether if there's a need maybe for organizations to all have a central system. Because if the client asks you to remove the information, it means he wants his information to be removed off your system, not just your laptop. So next time I'll go deeply into all the practicalities. I'll start off with the suggested wording in your mandates and your information sheets. Then I'm going to move over to the explanatory lines or clauses that we think should be sufficient if you pre-print them into your information sheet for the explanation of why things are collected. And then I'll show you the suggested wording where the client consents to all these elements: collection, processing, sharing. So there will be separate sections next week and separate slides regarding all the practical steps in the different documents. So hopefully you can dial in for our next session as well. The net has asked that I send the slides. Of course, all the slides will be sent to everybody. Charmaine has asked, what are MOs? Well, in Afrikaans, that's mos. No, I'm just joking. It's like POPI. Everybody says to me as an Afrikaans chickie, the POPI van POPI. So MOs is a shortened or an acronym for mortgage originators. You know, because if you think about it, you're sharing a lot of information with the mortgage originators, and you're sharing a lot of information in your transaction with attorneys. So you just need to start thinking that you have to explain why, and then you've got to get the client's consent to do that. Jan Hubert, good morning, Melanie. We'll appreciate if you can forward a copy of the slides and recording. Of course, Jan, we'll do that with pleasure. Once a client is given, but Virginia's question is, once a client is given permission, does it stand forever? You cannot get a blanket permission. You've got to get specific permission in respect of every aspect of that client's information, Virginia. You'll see next week what I mean, next session what I mean. So you've got to get the permission to collect the information for the property. Then you've got to get a permission to process information for that property. Then you've got to get permission to share that information. specifically, where do you share it? So all these questions that I had in my slides in those two blocks, you've got to somehow work out how you will be getting the client's permission to do all those things with the information. And it doesn't have to be a 10-page document. Next session, I'm going to show you, I've already done the wording. We've already pre-printed, I've already pre-drafted the suggested wording that goes into every of your documents that takes care of the permission on all those levels for all those reasons. Sean has another question. My understanding is that POPI deals with processing info and digital marketing, while CPA deals with cold calling. CPA, which is Consumer Protection Act, was insufficient in terms of dealing with all clients' rights in as far as cold calling is concerned. Yes, CPA 10 years ago, it does provide certain guidelines, but let's be honest, since the CPA was promulgated, which was 2010, there hasn't been much change, especially with the larger suppliers like MTN, Vodacom, Telkom, the banks. I mean, the CPA had all good intentions that if you opt out with the bank can't use your information going forward. But we know that the bank isn't being held liable at the Consumer Commission. Very few people complain about the banks. The process at the Consumer Commission is very lengthy. In order to complain, they need 1,000 complaints against MTN before they do anything about it. So in as far as CPA works together with POPI, the POPI provisions now enhances the CPA provisions. So POPI section 66 direct marketing provisions is very much more specific than CPA. So you have to comply with the POPI provisions. A call falls under POPI. Unfortunately, you'll see next time. We don't have enough time, obviously, to deal with all of it today, and I don't want to rush through the direct marketing. Don't stress about it too much, because next time when we go through it, I'm actually going to give you a script. So you'll see at the next session, then it's going to be really very practical. And then you'll understand what the POPI Act obliges in terms of direct marketing. Okay? Yeah, scripts, you'll see. I'll even read out what we're suggesting should be said. So next time is a little bit more specific, and you'll see next time with our next session how it interacts with what your homework should be. You should really go back to your organization and start the process of identifying the information that you've got, how you're getting it, what you're doing with it. Just write all that down for step 1. And then towards the end of the 6 months, we are going to help you guys with your privacy policies. So don't stress about the actual policy document. We're writing our own at the moment. So it's also so fresh since the promulgation. We don't need to rush into it. We have enough time. We'll develop a very good standard real estate privacy policy that everybody can adapt to their own circumstances. Thank you. Any other questions? So Sean, I hope we'll see you next time with our next session so that we can deal with the direct marketing specifically. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the next session.
Bye-bye, Mel. Thank you.
Bye, Lauren.
So good. Thank you, Mel.
See you next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel.
Bye, Karen. Bye, Maria.
Bye.
Bye, dankie.
Bye, Virginia.
Het is lekker om je te zien, Melanie. Bye bye.
Yes, bye. Lekker vir jou om jou ook te sien, Patricia. Ons gaan julle help met alles, hoor.
Ons weet, jy is die beste.
En dankie.
Ja, beslis. Dankie.
Dis 'n plesier, Bert. Dis nice om jou te sien. Oh, jy het baie lers daar agter jou. Goeieste.
Ja. Dis besig met groot goed hierso.
Ek wil nie vir julle my lers wys nie, want dit is definitief nie so baie soos jou lers nie.
Baie dankie.
Dis 'n plesier. Sien jou volgende keer.